Well, hey everyone. In this video, I'm going to be engaging with a clip from the Joe Rogan podcast where he has Aaron Rodgers on, and they are talking about, basically they're talking about the place of religion in terms of society and in terms of our moral compass.
But don't you think there has to be some sort of field of value that can orient people into like, hey, let's do things a little bit better because these things actually matter. There is right and wrong. There is morality. There is certain
Well, unfortunately, the problem with living in a secular society and living in a society that has a lot of people that are atheists, that have no belief system at all, is you find a belief system. And that's a lot of these people that call themselves atheists, or they've subscribed to the religion of woke. You know, their God is equity and inclusiveness. Their God is this ideology that they think that you have to subscribe to. And that's why it's spooky. Because
one of the interesting things, if you're aware of Joe Rogan and if you've kind of followed him with any kind of thought, maybe 3 to 5 years ago, it would have been very surprising to people who listened to him 3 to 5 years ago to hear him say what he's saying right here, because he used to be pretty hostile towards religion, and I don't know if it was specifically towards Christianity, but just towards religion in general. And I don't know if he ever called himself an atheist, but seemed to be a real big fan of outspoken atheists like Richard Dawkins. So to hear him talk in this way and recognize something that a lot of people have been recognizing, and the way I think a lot of us would put it, who are believers in Jesus, is that God has placed into us something that instinctively recognizes that there's something beyond us. Ecclesiastes 3 talks about it in terms of God has put eternity in our hearts. The idea that even if we are saying, hey, I'm just here for these, 60, 70, 80 years, and then I'm going to die, and then I'm going to be gone, and there was nothing before, and there's nothing after. We don't live as if that's true. We live as if we're concerned about our legacy, even though we're not going to be around to see our legacy. We live as if we care about what's going to happen after us, even though in some sense it's like, well, who cares? Like, we're not going to be around to experience any of it. We live as if we recognize there's got to be something more transcendent going on. And so what he's pointing out is what a lot of people, even some atheists, have pointed out, is that we find something. So if we reject religion, we find something else. And sometimes it is politics, sometimes it's some other ideology. He kind of describes the vague idea of being woke, and all right, my religion is equity and inclusion and diversity and things like that. We find something because this is how we're created. We're created to recognize that there is something beyond us.
Because human beings seem to have a very strong desire for some sort of order and form and some sort of pattern that they can follow that seems to be the right way to go. And they can be led by cults, they can be led by groups of people, they can be led by intolerant governments and evil armies and corrupt politicians. They can be led. But I think as time rolls on, people are going to understand the need to have some sort of divine structure to things. So
he's really right in what he was saying before. Because of the way that we are, because we have this instinctive, or we would believe sort of God-infused sense that there's something beyond us and there is right and wrong and there's some pattern that we're meant to follow, we are vulnerable to being led the wrong way. He mentioned cults, that sometimes you look at these, especially with like the suicide cults, and you're like, how did that happen? That happened because we have this sense that I'm supposed to be a part of something bigger and I'm looking for the divine guidance, and so we're vulnerable to being manipulated in that way. The way that some people behave towards politics and government, it reveals this sort of religious devotion, whether it's to a specific individual, which has happened throughout human history. It doesn't happen as much in the United States, but throughout human history, there are different political leaders that were treated almost as godlike figures, or in some cases, probably as godlike figures if they're kings and monarchs. What he's saying here is so true, and it's also powerful that he's pointing back to the idea that religion, he's speaking broadly of religion, religion has always been a part of this. Man is an instinctively religious creature. And some would believe, all right, that was some evolutionary thing that was needed for a while and now we've grown out of it. It doesn't seem like we've grown out of it. It seems like it's something that's there and that's built into us.
Some sort of belief in the sanctity of love and of truth. And a lot of that comes from religion. A lot of people's moral compass and the guidelines that they've used to follow to live a just and righteous life has come from religion. And unfortunately, a lot of very intelligent people, they dismiss all of the positive aspects of religion because they think that the stories are mere superstitious fairy tales, that they have no place in this modern world, and we're inherently good and your ethics are based on your old moral compass and we all have one, and that's not necessarily true.
I think one of the powerful things about what he's talking about here is there's been, I think, a misunderstanding sometimes in how this dialogue goes, especially with people who are atheists or materialists, is that they will say, you don't have to be religious to sort of be a good person. And for the sake of this, we'll just say to be a person who does some good things, because it's more complex when we talk about what it actually means biblically to be a good person. But just to be a person who does some good things, let's say for the sake of argument, to be a person who is faithful in marriage and is not violent in society and does not steal from other people. Let's do some basics like that. And for Christians, there may have been individual Christians who have said things that are untrue, but overall Christians have never said, unless you are a Christian, you can't do good things or you can't have positive things about you. In fact, Romans chapter 2 says that people who are not believers still do many of the things that God commands them to do because God has written his law on their hearts. And so the contention has never been, hey, if you're an atheist, you're just going to be going around killing and raping and stealing and all that sorts of things. That's never been the contention. The contention is your worldview as an atheist does not really support the idea that you couldn't do that. It doesn't really support the idea of there being a should. Because if you're an atheist, if you're a materialist, it's just sort of like what is, and might makes right. And even the idea of something like racism, which in our culture is sort of like, it would be like the number one sin in our culture in many ways. I don't think apart from a divine creator, you really have a great case against racism. Because you have the ability of some group to claim like, all right, well, maybe our group really is superior and maybe we're the ones that are going to survive. And maybe these other racial lines or other ethnicities, they were sort of lead ups to where we are right now. Whereas in Scripture, we have the idea that we were all born from one family. There's one race, it's the human race. We actually have a grounding in order to fight against racism. Even if many Christians have failed in this, we still have the grounding within our worldview to do it. In an atheistic worldview, again, it's not to say if you're an atheist, you're a racist. It's to say if you're an atheist, you might not have an airtight case to make of why it's not okay to be a racist, because sort of what is and might makes right, and if you're able to do it, there is no real should that comes out of the way that the universe is.
We need Jesus. I think for real. Like if he came back now, it'd be great. Like Jesus, if you're thinking about coming back
right now,
now's a good time.
Yeah, pretty soon. Yeah,
now's a good time.
Well, there's a lot of people that think that might be coming.
Well, it might be.
Mark of the beast. If there is the Christianity part and Jesus wants to come back and save everything,
it'd be good right around now.
Yeah.
Like don't wait till the election.
So some of you, if you knew about this video, that last part was that was the part that made headlines. Joe Rogan saying, we need Jesus. And it's interesting how it went down, because on the one hand, it certainly is not presented as this very genuine, I've really thought this through. It seems, more like some people that aren't religious at all will talk to the idea of having a come to Jesus moment. So it seems a little bit more along those lines, but still, it is very interesting that he didn't simply say, we need God, that he said, we need Jesus. And I don't know how much is behind that. How much is that he's not just identifying religion in general, but that he's seeing something about Jesus specifically, even though he hasn't embraced Jesus by faith, that he's seeing something about Jesus specifically that seems more tied in to sort of meeting this divinely given need that we have for guidance and for a savior. It's very powerful that he talks about it. It's interesting. I don't know for sure. The last thing I remember reading about Aaron Rodgers is that maybe he grew up as a Christian, but my impression is that he had completely rejected all that. I don't know if that's right. That's just the impression I was under because of something that I read a few years ago. And so he kind of presents it a bit more softly if this Christianity thing is true and if Jesus is going to come in and save us, almost in a trite way. Like, my impression is maybe Aaron Rodgers is pointing towards, like, we need to do something about this. We need to not just wait on Jesus to save us. And as believers, in some ways, we'd say, yeah, our idea, we're not living our lives just being like, hey, everything's going wrong. Well, hopefully Jesus will just come back and fix it all. We're living in order to be light in the community. We're living that God's kingdom will come here on earth as it is in heaven, and that in our families and in our communities and in our lives, we'll see more of the rule of God showing up in a really positive way. But we also are recognizing that we do need Jesus. We need Jesus now. We need Jesus in the future. Even his last comment, it was kind of a throwaway, funny comment, like, it'd be great to come now. It'd be great to come before the election. That's probably mostly for laughs. But in some ways, it's also a profound statement about the idea of our Savior is not going to come from the White House. It's not going to come from the Democrats or the Republicans. That's not going to be the person that provides the divinely given moral guidance and spiritual guidance that we all need. It's going to be Jesus. And so however serious he was much more right than maybe he knew he was.